Hello, just testing my microphone. Can you hear me?
We can hear you well, Chengete, although a bit faint.
Oh, it's a bit faint. Okay. Thanks. Let me see if I can fix that.
Much better, perfectly well. Okay, Piotr, can you please say something in your channel? No, perfect. We can hear you perfectly. We can hear you perfectly. Thank you.
Okay, we'll just give it an extra 2 minutes for those people still loading the program on their computer. Okay. Good afternoon, evening, and morning, ladies and gentlemen. Welcome to the second day of open consultations for the IGF 2020 meeting. As yesterday, before we start, I'd like to remind you of a few things that will make our sessions easier. The meeting is being recorded, transcribed, and live streamed through the IGF YouTube channel. Also, with thanks to the government of Poland, we are able to provide you with interpretation in English and French. So please, if you would prefer to speak in French, please do so. The facility is here. Links to the agenda, transcription, documents, and pre-recorded videos are available on the IGF front page, and also the links will be put into the chat. Please make sure your microphone is muted at all times. And if you want to make an intervention, please use the online request system. The link is available on the front page of the IGF website and will also be periodically put into the chat room. If for some reason you cannot log into the request system, please send a message to the host in the chat, or just put a message in the chat and a person from the secretariat will put your name on the queue. When it is your turn to take the floor, the chair will call your name and give you the floor. It is quite easy to see your place on the queue by looking at the queue list. If you don't have any connection limitation, please switch on your camera. It not only helps the scribes and the interpreters, but also enhances the atmosphere of the meeting. Please start your intervention by saying your name and affiliation. I know I'm guilty of it at times, but please also try and speak at a measured pace, not too fast, and this helps the non-native English speakers better understand you and also helps the scribes and the interpreters. Please also try and keep your intervention short, and once you finish your intervention, please remember to mute your microphone again. With that, let me call upon our chair, Henriette Esterhuizen, to introduce the agenda and start the meeting. Henriette, please.
Thank you very much, Shangatai. Good morning, good afternoon, good evening, everyone. I am calling in from Johannesburg. It's a public holiday here. It's June 16, which some of you might remember was a very, and is a very important day in the history of the struggle against apartheid. So I feel good to be sharing this day with all of you. Welcome to the interpreters and to the captioners as well, and to the MAG members and the observers secretariat. It's really good to have you all with us. Just a quick overview of the agenda. Today is the second day of the second open consultation of IGF 2020. We'll have a short welcome from UN DESA as soon as I am done. But just to review the agenda, our next plenary session after this opening is to look at the intersessional work of the IGF. So we'll start by looking at the Internet Governance Forum Best Practice Forums for 2020. I hope you've had a chance to review the videos. They will be very short. We'll do an overview of the best practice forums for this year, and then we'll have short updates on these best practice forums. And that will be followed by a question and answer session. Then we will have a break. And this is not a break where you are working together in breakout rooms in any way. We felt we needed to give you a proper break, particularly those for whom it would be lunchtime. And also our interpreters deserve and need a break. Then we start again at 1300 UTC. So please do come back. And that's our second plenary session. This time it will be focused on dynamic coalitions and national, regional, and youth IGFs, which I know many of you are part of. So we really want you and need you for that session. After that, after the discussion on the dynamic coalitions, there'll be a short report and then a discussion. Then we will we'll be honored, we'll be actually addressed by the United Nations Under Secretary General for Economic, Social and Affairs, Mr. Leo Zenmin. He'll address us shortly, and immediately after that, we're very honored to be visited by the host of IGF 2021. and 2022, and we'll have a short address by Vice Minister for International Affairs of the Ministry of Internal Affairs and Communications, and that is Her Excellency Ms. Makiko Yamada. After that short address, it should be, if we stick to time, 14:15 UTC, and then we go into an interactive Q&A session with Undersecretary General Fabrizio Hochschild about the roadmap for digital cooperation. And hopefully many of you or most of you have seen a presentation of this. So he won't present the roadmap. He'll just give us highlights and open the discussion for us. We'll have inputs from some of the co-champions and key constituents on recommendation 5, A and B. That's the recommendation that touches very much on the IGF and includes the IGF Plus model. So we'll have input from Germany and Switzerland and the United Arab Emirates, co-champions and key constituents, and then it'll be open to all of you to participate. And I know that there are other key constituents who have supported the roadmap process, and you are all invited to take the floor. That discussion then takes us up to 15:15 UTC, at which point we will be closing the session. I want you to hang on for the closing of the session because we are going to ask you some questions about the design of a virtual IGF. So please do not rush off or make sure that you come back for the end, because we'll do a brief poll just to get your feedback as the open consultation IGF community on how we can start the process of planning the virtual IGF. And that is it for today's agenda. I see no one requesting the floor. And so on that note, can I hand over to Wyman from UNDESA. And Wyman, thank you very much again for being with us.
Thank you, Andret. This is Wyman Kwok from UNDESA. Again, it's just a short welcome here. As you just heard from Andret, the Undersecretary General, Mr. Liu, he will be joining you live later at 1400 UTC. Here, I would just like to express the appreciation of UNDESA to the government of Poland for their strong commitments and support to now host the IGF in 2021. And in addition, for their generosity in supporting the interpretation and other costs in relation to the global virtual IGF this November. I also like to express thanks to the government of Ethiopia. And one group that I've missed out yesterday is actually to thank our colleagues from the United Nations Economic Commission for Africa. They'll be supporting us together with the host government, Ethiopia, in planning for the IGF in 2022. Andret mentioned about the Vice Minister from Japan for International Affairs for joining us. Japan, Andret, just to make a small correction that you said, Japan will be is planning to host the IGF in 2023. So with that, just this small and is important, but although a short acknowledgement to the host governments, I would like to hand back to you, Andret. Thank you.
Thanks very much, Wyman, and thanks for correcting me. So it's 2021 will be hosted by Poland, and 2022 by Ethiopia, and 2023 Japan. Correct?
Yes.
Thanks, Wyman. And before we start, I would like to ask Luis or Shengetai just to tell everyone who would like to use the French interpretation service how to go about it. So just because we very, thanks to the generosity of Poland, we are able to provide French and English interpretation today. We won't have it for the rest of the week, but we have it for today. So please use it. Secretariat, could you just give everyone clear instructions about how to go about using the interpretation service?
Luis, please go ahead.
Okay, you can see me. So this is very easy. Basically, at the bottom of your screen, you will have an interpretation button saying English and French interpretation available. You can click on that button and you will see French and US flags there for selecting French and English languages. You can, if someone speaks in French, for example, you can select the English flag and you will listen to the English interpretation. And if and at any time, for example, now that I'm talking in English, you can select the French flag and you would hear the French interpretation. So it's very easy to use. Simply to let you know that when you listen to the dubbed channel, you will also hear at the bottom the original speech, just to have the tones of the speech, but you can also mute that if you prefer. In the same interpretation menu, you will have an option called mute original audio. So, and that's all. It's very easy to use, and you can at any time you can click on off in that menu to go to the floor language. Hope that clarifies. Thank you, Henriette.
Thanks, Luis. Is that clear? Does everyone who would like to use the interpretation, is it clear? Has everyone followed that? Just speak up if you were not clear. Okay, good. And please, if you do need help, just type in the chat session and the Secretariat will follow up with you. So, and now let's move on to our first plenary session. Best practice forums were introduced in the IGF quite a few years ago, and we have some of the pioneers of this modality with us in the room today, like Marcus Kummer. And I'm not sure if Constance is with us, Constance Baumler from ISO. But BPF's best practice forums, sometimes people say they feel we should call them good practice forums, not best practice forums, emerged as a way of taking the richness of participation and inclusion in the IGF and using that to address topics that have been discussed extensively, that are in a sense actually maturing. There's emerging consensus on those issues, to take them then out of the IGF dialogue format into a format where they can then be channeled into concrete recommendations. So that's more or less the history of the BPF. We'll talk more about that. But to get us started with BPFs, one of our long-term best practice forum consultants, because best practice forums do achieve some support from the Secretariat and UNDESA, he will introduce to us the 2020 best practice forums. So Wim, are you there? Are you ready to take the floor?
And now you should be able to hear me. I'm trying
Yes.
to share a presentation we had prepared for this session. So if you, apologies for this sort, then I try to share. The better you are prepared, the more things that can go wrong, I think. Just a second. Should be able to see it now.
Perfect, perfect.
That's perfect.
Clearly, please go ahead.
Okay, so like you mentioned in the introduction of the session, the best practice forums have been around since 2014, and they are one of the parts of the intersessional program of the IGF. An intersessional program that was created to give more weight to the IGF in terms of concrete impact and concrete outputs. So since 2014, BPFs have been discussing topics that are relevant to the future of the internet, with the aim of facilitating a dialogue between stakeholders and collecting emerging and existing practices to address specific themes. It's a definition that you have to read 3 or 4 times, but I think there are 3 elements that are very important. It is an open forum for stakeholders to discuss, on concrete issues relevant today, relevant to the internet of tomorrow, and to look for specific solutions and specific best practices, share them, collecting them, and provide them as a resource to the community. BPF typically start to work, or the BPF topics typically are selected very early on in the IGF cyclus, January, February, and then they start to work towards the annual meeting later on in the year. This year, there have been 4 topics selected for best practice forums. One is cybersecurity. There is gender and access, data and new technologies, and local content. The different MAC coordinators and MAC facilitators that are responsible for the best practice forums will give a brief introduction in a minute. But before moving there, I really would like to stress how important it is for best practice forums to have community involvement. Like I said, it is not a think tank or a small group of people. No, the idea is that best practices discuss concrete issues and look in the community what answers the community has or has prepared to deal with those questions, to deal with those challenges. So for BPF, it is very important that there is that community input in the design, in the discussion on how a BPF should approach their topic, but also community input because the community and the different stakeholders are the ones that have to deliver the examples. So how is it possible now for you and for everyone to participate in the best practice forums? One of the most important things, each BPF has a specific, has its own webpage. Go and see there to stay up to date with the progress, the plan, the work plan, and the activities. Don't worry, at the end of this presentation at today's call, there is an overview with the different links to the different web pages. So go regularly visit the updates, or if you're interested in one specific BPF, keep an eye on that web page. Then join BPF discussions. How is it possible? Every BPF has its own open mailing list where you can join, where you can help building and help guiding the BPF. Well, there are, I would say, 2 types of discussions on the BPF mailing list. One, what should the BPF be doing? And then the second one, discussing specific items. So either way, if you're on the list, you can join those discussions. You will also, on those lists, get the information when and where the BPF is meeting. Different BPFs, they have work with virtual meetings. Depending, I mean, on the BPF, one BPF has every 2 or 3 weeks, one has a meeting every month, but on the webpage, you can find the details and the links to the meetings. Participating is free for everyone interested, and you just have to log in, and please do participate. And like I said, every BPF is, each BPF, it's very important that there is input from the community in terms of concrete case studies or concrete examples. I would say look out for BPF because they will have their individual calls for feedback and input. But I think that's enough for more. I'm happy to come back and discuss more on this, how to join BPF and BPF discussions. But I think it's important to move them to our first short update on BPF, and I think that's the BPF on cybersecurity. And give the floor to Ben.
Good morning from Seattle. I hope you can hear me. My name is Ben Wallace. I work for Microsoft. I'm the MAG member who acts as the facilitator for the BPF on cybersecurity. And apologies in advance if there's any background noise. One of my cats is quite hungry. I'll talk about the BPF work this year, but in order to do so, it's helpful to first explain the work that was done last year. In 2019, the BPF explored best practices in relation to recent international cybersecurity initiatives. such as the Paris Call for Trust and Security in Cyberspace, then norms packages adopted by the UN Group of Governmental Experts, the UNGGE, and by the Global Forum for Security in Cyberspace, the GCSC, and by many others. And the report last year identified best practices for how to implement and adhere to the different principles, norms, and policy approaches that are contained in these international agreements. So for this year, we set up 3 work streams, and the first one, to some extent, is actually a continuation of last year's work. And that's partly because new norms have been developed since we did our analysis last year, and we'd like to take them into account. But also the breadth of the work last year limited the possibility to go into depth. So we want to progress the work partly by selecting a few sets of norms and looking into them in greater detail. Secondly, we will explore norms assessment. Now that is to say, how can you assess whether norms are being respected by state and non-state actors? And does the act of assessing in itself contribute to increasing the take-up of the norms? And for this, we will be incorporating a multidisciplinary angle by bringing in experts from other strands of social science where norms have been dominant forms of rulemaking, to see what learnings could be applied in the areas of cybersecurity. And finally, and this is something that BPFs generally try and do, but we're going to formalize efforts to outreach and widen participation of the BPF. And in particular, we'll be trying to engage with governments, developing countries, and youth representatives. And the draft output will be shared with the BPF for comment before being published later in the summer, alongside a call for contributions from the wider community. And then we would incorporate all the inputs into a final draft report to be presented and discussed as part of IGF 2020. The last thing I wanted to share is that we are going to reflect within these work streams whether and how to take account of the COVID-19 pandemic in the BPS work this year. There have been targeted cyber attacks on hospitals and research institutions, for example, that only further underlines the need to equip organizations with good practices to enhance their security. So that's something we're looking at within the work streams, as to whether that can be reflected in this year's work. Thank you very much.
And the idea was to have the 4 updates of the BPFs for this year, and then there's a time for question and answers for each of the BPFs. So I would like to move to the next BPF, which is the BPF data and new technologies in internet context.
Thanks, Wee, for giving me the floor. Can you hear me?
Yes, Titi, we can hear you. Please.
Okay, thanks a lot. My name is Titi Cassa. I work for Agit. I'm MAG member and facilitator of the BPF on data and new technology in an internet context. The BPF is focusing on how user data is collected, analyzed, and used, and on what are the best practices to ensure that the data is used to bring benefits and not harm user. So the BPF intends to focus on how initially and up. Okay.
Just sorry to interrupt, Titi. So all participants, if you are not speaking, please mute your mic. We suddenly had quite a bit of noise. It's gone. Thanks. Go ahead, Titi.
Okay, thanks, Henriette. So just I was saying that the BPF focus is on how user data is collected, analyzed, and used, and on the best practice to ensure that the data is used to bring benefits and not to harm users. So the BPF is focused on initiatives and application that deal with the specific concern related to the use and the processing of data. Actually includes also the discussion on COVID-19, because COVID-19 has accelerated several discussions about privacy and protection of the user. But actually these are not new discussion, and also they are not discussion related only to the use of data and new technologies in the context of pandemic. So the BPF will look at case study related to the current health crisis, as well as case studies outside this context. We have defined a work plan this year with participants, which includes 3 main elements: define issues and concerns that we actually have discussed so far with participants, identify relevant stakeholders and existing stakeholder dialogues, and also collect case study and document these existing project and initiative addressing concern. We had a lot of discussion this year, and the need to have a clear definition and the need to use an ambiguous language came out in order to keep focus on the discussion. There were also different definitions on data governance, data processing, and also on the definition of best practice in the scope of the BPF. During the last call, we also introduced a new concept, the concept of issue card. What is the issue card? It's a tool to help stakeholders asking the right question when assessing data and new technology application. The issue card is a list of concern, question, and potential issues related to the use of user data formulated as a questions. We define 4 clusters of issues card. Data collection, which includes all questions related to what type of data is collected, how, if they are collected in anonymized, aggregate, and so on, and also the context in which the data are collected, democratic and free society or versus repressive system. The second issues card we have defined is related to data storage, which includes all the questions and issues related to how and where is the data stored, how long is the data kept, and when they are canceled. The third issue card is labeling and unlocking value, which includes questions related to the what purpose is data serving? Is this useful, necessary? And also a question related to who decides which are legitimate purposes and aims of data collection. The last but not least issue card is related to data sharing. How can data be shared in order to create value for all parties? This could be one of the questions. And also different model of data sharing and who is benefit for data sharing. So what are the next steps for the BPF? We are going to review the issues card with BPF participants. We will publicize the issues card on the BPF webpage, and we will invite community to provide their feedback. And also we will launch a call for case study and best practice examples. I want also to remember you that next BPF call will be held on the 25th of June, 3 p.m. OTC. So I invite you to join to this call. I want to also thank Emanuela Girardi, that is co-facilitator of this BPF, and Wim de Cetella as IGF Secretariat Consultant for the BPF. Thank you.
Thank you, Titi. And apologies, I think I skipped this slide of the BPF gender and access. So please, Maria Paz.
Hi, Wim. It's actually going to be me presenting on the. Yeah.
Perfect. Please.
Please
Hi.
introduce yourself, Chennai.
Yes. Hi, everyone. My name is Chennai Che, dialing in from Johannesburg. I'm a second year MAG member and co-facilitator of the BPF Gender and Access with Maria Paz as the MAG members, and with support from organizations such as APC and Point of View members as well on the facilitation of the BPF. So this year's Best Practice Forum actually stems from the one that we had last year, where we were specifically looking at gender and economic participation. However, we wanted to take a more reflective process in terms of the policy practices and spaces, and to take on a much more thought-provoking methodology to understanding policy practices. And we took a look at, so our focus for this year is assessing internet-related policy processes and spaces through a feminist approach to determine whether and how they protect and foster participation of women and gender diverse people, particularly young ones. We're specifically focusing on internet-related policy processes and spaces that address issues related to violence, harm, pleasure, and consent online. So our 4 focus areas are a way in which to balance the way in which women and gender diverse, in fact, everyone experiences the internet, but to move from the just it being a space of harm for women and gender diverse people, but to actually look at the other side of the coin, which is pleasure and consent online. So in light of COVID-19 and an increased reliance on the digital space as well, and an awareness that there is likely to be an increased gender-based violence, but there's also an increased online gender-based violence, we're actually going to be considering how digital policies focusing on COVID-19 consider gender perspectives related to violence, harm, pleasure, and consent online, and integrate the views of women and gender diverse people. So far we've had 2 very successful, we've had introductory calls where we had guest speakers, including the initial facilitator from 2015, Anne van der Spee, who actually reflected on their experience with their online gender-based violence work that was then related to the Gamergate attack, and how it was received and engaged with within the IGF policy space. And then we also had Nima Ayer from Policy, who presented on the research that they've done on online gender-based violence in African countries. Next week, we're going to have speakers who will be talking about the consent and pleasure aspect. And I think this is quite an interesting BPF in terms of like the crosscuts it has in all of the work that it's done within the IGF and the policy processes. The timeline is shared here on what our next steps are going to be. So we meet every second Thursday. In end of the June, July, we will be putting together our methodology, which is fully aware of the context in which these are sensitive topics and may not just be done as a public survey, as that was the experience last year where we had 2 very radical people respond to the survey, if I'm not mistaken. Ariette was facilitating that. And then we will have as you can see from the timeline, we should be able to have the findings by September, draft report for public comment by October, and then everything will be ready for the presentation in November. So I do encourage everyone to attend, including other MAG members and community members, so that we can strengthen the work of the BPF and have diverse inputs on the topic. Thank you.
Thank you for this update. And then for the next one is the BPF local content, for which we will show a video. I don't know, Louis, if you can share the video. No, it's the video on the BPF local content. It's the
Then Carlos Afonso is with us, if you did want him
Carlos and Giacomo, yes.
Both of you are with us.
Yes, we are here and waiting for the video. Luis said it would be okay to run it, and it's updated, so it would be better to have it run, and then we comment at the end very quickly. And this is Henriette.
Yes, hello, Marcos. I'm going to share it just now, okay?
Thank you, Luis.
Can you see the screen?
The video has not started yet, Louise. Not from where I can see it. But in the meantime, while we're waiting for the local content BPF video to play, people who want to ask questions about these BPFs, please start adding your hands to the speakers queue.
Yes, the idea was to save time with the video.
And I also think that we should play a different video where Carlos is there while Luis is trying to do with Marcus video of Marcus.
No, my video doesn't need to be shown.
Carlos, do you mind? We're having technical problems and I don't want to keep people waiting. Do you mind? We can show the slide and then if you can just give people a quick verbal input, please.
To do it, if you can show the slides one by one.
No, the slide that's included in the Wim's presentation.
It's embedded in the video. That's right.
Yes.
But there is also separate PDF file with the slides, which was sent to the. I never saw.
Okay, I think we
now we found it. Okay. No sound, Luis. My voice is lousy, but.
Secretariat, there's no audio on the video.
We are learning very quickly how to do video in Zoom.
Is it possible to give us like 10 minutes? Could we ask questions on the other best practice forums and then come back to this one?
Okay, we can definitely do that.
Yes.
I therefore open the floor to questions on the first three BPFs that we heard about. So that was gender and cybersecurity, and the one with the long name that I always get the order incorrect.
It's data and new technology in an internet context.
Data and new technologies and internet
context.
Internet context. Thanks, Titi. Sorry about that. Anyone who wants to, I can't see the speakers queue right now. But is there anyone who wants to ask questions about how to get involved, about how these BPFs work, what they've achieved and what they hope to achieve? I see a hand from Jutta. Jutta, you have the floor.
Thank you, Henriette, for giving me the floor. Jutta Kroll, MAG member in my third year from Germany for civil society issues. I wanted to ask Titi whether she could explain a bit how that best practice forum has developed from its start to a much broader perspective. I get it. So I know that you started with Internet of Things and data and artificial intelligence as well. And now I see the best practice forum has fast expanded its focus. I do think that's very beneficial for the task of the BPF, but could you explain a bit how you came from the beginning to where you are now?
Thanks, Jutta, for this question. Actually, the BPF started on 2018, and the focus was the name also was different, was the BPF on IoT, big data, and artificial intelligence. The first year, 2018, we actually shared best practice about how to better facilitate a dialogue. I mean, it was important for us to be sure that people discussing this kind of issues use the same terminology. So the first year was most dedicated to the best practice on terminology, on how to use better words to narrow and to discuss the topics. Last year, on 2018, we continued the discussion, but we were more focused on how to improve trust of application on IoT data and artificial intelligence, and how, I mean, this application can be used to address societal challenges. But what happened is that, especially during the event that we had in Berlin, we recognized the importance to address all the issues related to data collection. There were a lot of highlighting on this kind of issues. That's why we decided to change the name and to focus the BPF more on how data are collected and analyzed, because this came out from the discussion we had in Berlin, because there were a lot of best practice shared among participants on these issues, and that's why we changed the title and also the focus of the BPF. I hope this explain a little bit more. Maybe if you need any other explanation, please let me know. Thank you.
Thank you, Titi. That was excellent. I now better understand how the focus has expanded and how beneficial that is for the work of the BPF. Thank you so much.
Thanks, Jutta. Anyone else with any questions? Secretariat, are you ready to play the local content BPF video?
I'm sorry to create this difficulty, sorry.
Yes,
Mary.
we are. Just give me 10 seconds and we'll be able to play it right now.
I see there's a hand from Mary, but Mary, please wait until after we put the video. Thanks.
Well, great sounds of this thing. So. Hi, I am Carlos Afonso, a member of the Multi-Stakeholder Advisory Group of the Internet Governance Forum for 2020 and a co-facilitator of the Best Practice Forum on Local Content. The BPFs are a unique platform for multi-stakeholder discussion on topics relevant to the future of the Internet. They aim at facilitating dialogue and collecting emerging and existing practices to address specific issues or policy questions. BPFs are an intersessional activity. An important part of the work is done in the months ahead of the annual IGF meeting. BPF outcomes in the form of compilations of good practices and recommendations, are intended to help inform policy debates and serve as inputs into other pertinent forums. BPFs carry their work in an open and consultative manner. All interested stakeholders are encouraged to contribute through public consultations, surveys, mailing list discussions, and online meetings. Taking a look on the BPF on local contents, since it started in the IGF 2014 in Istanbul, when it established a focus on how to create an enabling environment for the development of local content, which is part of one of the action lines of the Geneva Plan of Action. In 2017 in Geneva, the BPF collected examples of initiatives that succeeded in stimulating the creation of local cultural assets. The goal was to inspire policymakers and other stakeholders. The BPF in Paris examined the relationship between local internet access provision and the development of locally relevant content and services in order to enable a sustainable local content value chain. In Berlin in 2019, it extended the scope with an emphasis on preservation and promotion of languages and heritage under conditions in which cultural and linguistic diversity, artifacts, and histories are sometimes at risk as a result of political and social shifts. Several issues from 2019 are still pertinent. Practices demonstrating the benefits and risks of enforcing author or community rights on cultural assets. State support for creativity in all cultural fields is central, a major export item in developed countries. How the UNESCO Convention on Cultural Diversity may positively impact the fair trade of digital cultural goods. Various mechanisms of direct or indirect support to local content production, not only state aids and grants, but also other indirect mechanisms, such as quotas of local production, private sector supporting local cultural production, stimulus to public service media. Cases which illustrates how internet platforms contribute to the production and circulation of local content to the benefit of local national cultures. Developing local capacities for proper digitization of local content, creating an enabling environment to secure digital assets while minimizing barriers to their broad use. Encouraging learning and use of cryptography for protection of sensitive content. Creative use of local networks and encrypted tools by communities to protect their content without renouncing broader communications in a safer way. Free or affordable use of locally available spectrum to effectively enable community networks and media. The issue of digital sovereignty raised by the European Union and by some European governments applies also to this specific field, where localization of citizens' data related to content and content itself ought to be considered. The consultants and the co-facilitators of the BPF on local content are proposing that in 2020, the BPF concentrates its work in one key element which emerged from the 2019 outcome report, the need to further explore issues related to the protection, preservation, and remuneration of creative work and collective wisdom from a local content perspective. As such, the BPF would focus on how to protect, preserve, and remunerate creative work and collective wisdom in order to create a sustainable model for the production, distribution, and local fruition of local content in the digital age. This may involve intellectual ownership rights, communities' intellectual property rights, ownership of national or community identifiers of natural resources, and protection of creative works, and so on. There are several issues related to the new focus. For instance, successful examples of remuneration and protection of traditional collective wisdom, traditional and innovative ones over the internet, comparison for various existing models to protect different kinds of rights, and the opportunities and challenges they bring when it comes to the development and protection of local content. Successful examples of approaches that help local communities develop their creative products and services. Best practices about the creation of virtual circles to put in direct relations, producers and final users through innovative solutions. Approaches for protecting against risks of commercial takeover of local and indigenous identifiers of natural cultural assets. Examples, the cases of Babaçu, Cupuaçu, and the Japanese food companies. There is a timeline for the BPF on local content. From May to September, community work, calls, surveys, outreach. In October, draft report issued for comments. November, BPF session at the IGF 2020. And December, the final report. A final word is that the IGF intersectional work makes no sense without the effective participation of the community. The Secretariat provides the mechanisms to enable this participation through lists, online meetings, and support to the facilitators. This is especially the case of the best practice forums, which rely on exchange of knowledge on experiences provided by participants. We therefore encourage you to contribute to this work. The presentation shows local content BPF webpage, the BPF local content mailing list, and the BPF local work plan document. Thank you.
Thanks very much, Carlos, for that input on the local content best practice forum. And everyone, please note that there's this level of detailed report available for all the BPFs. We didn't have time to play the videos today, but they are on the website. You can link to them through the agenda. So I urge you to look at those reports. It will give you more depth, more detail on what the BPFs have done. And Wim, can I hand back to you at this point before we open to questions and answers? Did you want to make any concluding remarks?
Thank you. Did somebody wanted to say a word? Start talking. But anyhow, I would like to thank the BPF coordinators for giving these updates. And the second point is it is important for the community to provide feedback. Like Henriette mentioned, the videos, detailed videos, are on the website that say from what the plans are, what is coming the next month. Second point, don't forget to check the website for what happens. So that's it. I think that now we can go to the Q&A questions for the BPF co-facilitators, because there is also the separate exercise on BPF, the BPF on BPFs, that will be presented by Marcus after this round of Q&A. But for me, I would like to thank all and hand back to you, Henriette.
Thanks very much for that. So now the floor is open to questions and discussion on these 2020 BPFs. And Mary Oduma, you had your hand. So please take the floor and introduce yourself. Others, please add your names to the queue. Mary, you can go ahead.
Hello, I'm sorry. Sorry, I was trying to unmute myself.
That's fine. We can hear you
Okay.
now.
Thank you for giving me the floor. My question was to Titi on BPF on data. I wanted to know whether they're taking into consideration the data localization and cross-border data issues and governance in the BPF activity.
Thanks, Mary, for your question. Yes, Mary, we are also considering this aspect that you have just highlighted. Actually, we had a very intensive discussion on data governance. So one of the most shared definition of data governance was actually related to the flow of data cross-border. So yes, we will consider it, and then we will invite you to join and also to highlight any other aspects that you want the BPF should include. Thank you.
Okay, thank you, Titi, for that answer. Now to Wim, I want to ask what happens, the output of this of the BPFs. Do we share it with the stakeholders, and do we monitor whether stakeholders are taking up implementing or accepting or collaborating to see that there's implementation of the recommendations that are coming out from the BPFs, or just for us to throw issues out and allow it float? Thank you.
Thank you very much, Mary, for this question. It is very relevant, and not only for the BPF data, but for all BPFs. Is what happens with the BPF output. The idea is that the BPF collects information, case studies, and it is presented to everyone that can make use of it. I'm hesitating to say too much because I know it's actually one of the key points of what Marcus will present after this Q&A session, is exactly the issue of how can we help BPF on bring their inputs out and make sure that they arrive at a relevant place. So I don't want to say too much about this, but thank you for the question, and I'm sure that it will come up later on.
Thanks, Mary, and thanks Wim for that. Nigel Hickson, you have the floor, and please, everyone, remember to introduce yourselves for the record. Nigel.
Oh yes, thank you very much indeed, and good morning, good afternoon. I'm speaking on my own behalf, so to speak. Thank you very much indeed, well, for this opportunity during this open consultation to discuss these things. It's great to have a second day of open consultation. And really, the question I had, and I'll be brief for once, is to Ben Wallace. Thank you, Ben. It's really nice to see you. Nice to hear about the ongoing work on cybersecurity. This is something that I think has been really important over a number of years. This best practice forum, and just to say that I just as a mere observer would really encourage you to look at cybersecurity and COVID-19. I mean, not so, not so much in lots of people are looking at this, but I think to assemble some of the facts would be really useful, because no doubt you'll have a session at the IGF, and to be able to put over a sort of unvarnished and unbiased account of what has gone on, I think would be useful. I was aghast to listen in to a UN discussion the other day concerning the UN's 75th declaration, where so many countries were expressing real concerns on this issue, and nothing wrong with that. Their ambassadors were talking about the enhancement of cybersecurity attacks, of cybercrime, of gender hatred and things, and one is not dismissing this at all, but the thrust of their arguments was that this was an overwhelming problem during COVID, and therefore that you know, a way to tackle this would be to have, you know, UN top-down regulation or whatever. Now, I'm not saying it isn't a global problem, but I think, you know, the work you do, it would be so good to be able to have a factual-based account of actually what you know, what the issues have been in terms of false registration of names, in terms of you know, and other types of phishing, etc. And sorry, I've gone on too long, but so I think this work is really useful what you do. Thank you.
Thanks very much for that, Nigel. I'm sure people want to respond, but let's listen to the next speaker first, and then we'll give the BPF coordinators the chance to respond. Giacomo, you have the floor.
Yes, thank you very much for being here, and with Carlos facilitating the coordination of the BPF on local content. He said already most of it, so I want just to stress 2 points. One is that to remember that there is a survey going on in these days, so please, I invite everybody that is listening this conversation to join and give his contribution in writing. This will be shaping the next steps of the activity of the BPF. The second point is that, especially now we are talking about the what could be the future model for the IGF, and this is overlapping with the discussion going with the United Nations high-level panel on digital cooperation. I think that we are already experimenting one of the modality that could be an intersessional activity, because we have inside our BPF a strong and active participation of international organizations that have a mandate for contents that are the UNESCO, the WIPO, and others. So I think that if we have a look at it in this perspective, we can use this BPF as a laboratory for enhancing the quality of the contribution of the IGF to the global discussion on internet governance. The crisis of COVID-19 showed us dramatically that the best way to bring the people that is out of the internet at the moment into the internet conversation is through the contents. The schools, the teachers, the pupils, the parents that were not familiar with the internet have been obliged to, because they need to access to this kind of content. So I think that this is one of the key for the success of any internet governance policy for the future. That's all. Thank you very much.
Thanks very much, Giacomo, for that. I don't see any other hands or speakers requesting the floor. So I'd like to give the BPF facilitators the opportunity to respond. Any further comments from your end?
Carlos here. Yes, thank you for the opportunity of showing the video. Great, this really helped a lot. The presentation itself is available somewhere in the IGF website, and if you want to download it. And I cannot stress enough the importance of anyone who is interested in the themes of the local content BPF to answer the survey. The deadline is June 24th. The survey is already online. If you please can participate and contribute, it would be great. Thank you.
Thanks, Carlos. Chennai, do you have anything to add?
Yes, I do. Sorry, I was looking for my unmute button. Yes, definitely. I think, as always, my call is for everyone to engage and share particular spaces. We have been thinking about assessing, well, one of the spaces we're going to assess is definitely going to be the Internet Governance Forum itself. And we had a very good comment yesterday in the tea break session that I had with Xianong from UN, where she mentioned that, you know, the analysis that's done in terms of the sessions that are provided looks at participation, but it would require actually looking at the content in terms of like what are the gender issues that come up, and that for me is such a crucial input from someone who's not part of the process. And I do encourage other MAG members who participate in other policy spaces that may have value to engage on this assessment, and to also definitely when the interviews, because we're not going to do a survey given the sensitivity of this topic, but to actually respond when you're called upon, including the Secretariat itself, other MAG members and other people in other policy spaces, to respond to the survey interviews that we're going to do, so that we build a rich report that takes into account the different processes and policy spaces, and can also provide the best practices forums to show that, you know, the BPF on gender and the IGF space itself is innovative in the way that it thinks about these issues beyond just participation in these spaces. So yeah.
Thanks, Chennai. And Titi, do you want to add anything?
I want to just add a few words asking to you all to participate to the BPF, to give your feedback and to share best practices. There is a lot to say on data collection, data sharing. So please participate and join your best practice and your comment. Thank you.
Thanks, Titi. Ben.
Thank you. So let me just respond to Nigel, and great to hear from you too, Nigel. Thank you. I've taken note of your excellent suggestion about whether the BPF could help to provide an account of what's gone on with cybersecurity issues and COVID-19 this year. I'm going to share that with the BPF lead expert and others who are leading the work streams to see how that could be integrated into the work or done in parallel. In the IGF context, as one of those who was looking at the workshop proposals under the track, the track for trust, I did note there were 1 or 2 workshops also related to this topic about security of the infrastructure in relation to COVID-19. So it would be interesting to see if 1 or 2 of those ended up being approved and being part of the program. That would be another way for the IGF to look at those issues. And finally, just to kind of, well, beyond the IGF, as you were talking about a discussion around the UN 75 declaration, I know the roadmap for digital cooperation included a paragraph about healthcare facilities being the targets of serious cyber attacks during the crises, and even that the WHO has faced severe cyber attacks and impersonation attempts. And so, yes, there's clearly an interest within the global community and amongst governments. And I just wanted to share that you know, one of the aims of the BPF, of the IGF generally, and of the BPF in particular, as I think Henriette said yesterday, is the importance of taking our work in the IGF and making connections with relevant decision-making bodies and relevant discussions elsewhere. And so one thing that, that the BPF on cybersecurity did with our report last year was to present it as an input to the UN's ongoing OEWG exercise, the open-ended working group on developments in the field of information and telecommunications. And so that was recognized as a formal input into that process, and we had the help of UNDESA in making that link with this other part of the UN and getting us a hearing. So a good opportunity to thank them as well. Thank you.
Thanks very much to Ben and to all the other facilitators, and thanks to Wim for his input. I just want to urge 2 things, maybe 3. First one, the videos are all on the agenda. They're embedded in the agenda, and they are in the documents section of the meeting page. So you can view them from the agenda. And then the second point, participation. Really, the participation is vital. And you can participate in different ways. You can contribute to the surveys, you can be part of the discussion, you can contribute writing. And if you're from government or an institution, you can either participate in the capacity of your institution, or you can participate in the capacity of your individual, as an individual. You don't have to feel that you have to represent an institution, but if you can, that's also good. And then the third thing, these BPFs this year all build on work that took place last year. So look at the reports and the outcomes from the 2019 IGF cycle, because they inform the work that is being done this year. So thanks very much to everyone for that. I now want to give the floor to Marcus Kummer, past Executive Secretary and past Chair of the MAG, who has very graciously agreed at the request of myself and the MAG to do a bit of a reflection, a critical, constructive looking back at BPFs. Marcus, you have the floor.
Thank you, Henriette. Hello, everyone. Good afternoon, good morning. Can you hear me? Can you see me?
We can hear you. We cannot see you.
We can see your presentation.
Okay. Well, that's more important.
Right.
Well, I did try and turn the camera on. But anyway.
No, we can see you now.
Okay. Yeah, I think a lot of what this work consists of has already come up in the discussion so far. Just to recall, you asked me, Henriette, in the first meeting of the MAG this year to launch a process that would evaluate past efforts and look at the lessons learned of what we had so far. And that's what's on the slide there. And in the video I had uploaded, I gave a very high-level overview, and I alluded to these 4 buckets that will be contained in the final output report of what we are working on. We consider there will be a toolbox for future BPF facilitators. There will be a modalities document, and there will be suggestions and recommendations on how to move forward, and it will contain metrics to evaluate BPF proposals and outcomes. And in the video, I mentioned that we find it not that easy actually to come up with the metrics, and it would be nice to have quantitative metrics where you can just tick a box, but the discussion so far revealed that we are more moving towards qualitative metrics, how to assess the various IGFs. And I would like now to go a bit into the preliminary findings so far. So we identified areas where we clearly can do better. There is maybe a first point, the general awareness and understanding of the BPF activities, what they are and what they not are. Then secondly, we don't have a sort of universally agreed on document that sets out the modalities and gives practical guidance for the organizers. And also we find it will be important to keep focus and for each BPF to setting realistic and achievable goals. And participation has been mentioned by many who have taken the floor so far, BPF facilitators, but also yourself, Henriette, and other participants. Participation is key. Participation of the community, but also of key stakeholders, of relevant institutions in any particular field of activity. And then the other point that has also been mentioned, Ben gave a successful example of sharing and disseminating outputs. That was the BPF security last year, which was actually fed in to a UN process. But there clearly is something where we can do better, we can improve, and make sure have maybe a more systematic sharing and disseminating of the outputs. And linked to that is also then the actual impact the BPF can have on internet governance and policy in the broader area, in other organizations and governments. We had some examples where we had actually had impact, but I think it has not been broad enough so far, and that definitely is room for improvement. And when it comes to evaluating and selecting BPF proposals and outputs, that is then something we look forward to once the report is out, and hopefully the report can then guide the MAG in assessing the outcomes and in selecting new proposals. So one point, are the issues proposed, are they relevant and suitable for a BPF? It's not good enough just to be interesting, but it needs also be a topic where it is possible and practical to collect best practices on a particular subject. And then the functioning of the BPF on any given topic. Will it be possible to have an open and bottom-up multi-stakeholder dialogue on this? Or would it be too controversial? If people don't even talk to each other, then there's not much point. But if there is a common understanding of what the issues are, then it's much easier. And then lastly, and maybe most importantly, would be, can we anticipate that there will be a successful outcome? Is the goal the BPF has set itself, is it realistic? Is it achievable? Has it the potential to have impact? So these are some of the elements that will be part of the report. We had hoped to share a first draft ahead of this MAG meeting. Unfortunately, it was not possible. We were all a little bit delayed in whatever we were doing due to COVID-19, but hopefully in the next fortnight, we'll be able to circulate a draft report, and then we invite the MAG and the broader community to provide feedback during the summer months, July and September. And the final report that will then go to the IGF should be ready in the beginning of October and can still be adjusted at the IGF itself, at the virtual IGF this year. And hopefully then we will have something that will provide guidance to the MAG and provide the tools for the BPF facilitators to carry on their activities from 21 onwards. Thank you very much for your attention, and happy to answer any questions you may have and take on board any suggestions you may have. Thank you.
Thank you very much for that update, Marcus. Now, does anyone have any questions or comments in response to Marcus's report and this BPF on BPFs? I cannot see the speakers queue. Go ahead, Carlos, and others, please put up your hand or use the speakers queue. Carlos Afonso, you can go
Yes,
ahead.
thank you. Very quick, Marcus. You say that there will be a final report on at the end of October, and usually the BPFs do their final outcome reports at the end of the respective session in the IGF itself. Will there be a wrap up on the BPF's work after those outcome reports, which will be presented at the IGF itself, or the work of the BPF on BPFs finishes in October? That's my question.
That's an excellent question, and that is definitely something that is open for discussion. I think your point is a very valid one. If we follow the BPF modality, the report mentioned in the slide, the 1st October, that will be the final report of the preparatory work. But my understanding would also be that it will have to be discussed at the IGF itself, like all the other BPF reports, and then adjusted, taking on board the discussion and the reactions of the community. But the report that will be ready is an input document into the BPF, but this is something we will have to discuss also within the group, and we will take on board, obviously, community input. And the document that will be released early July will be open for discussion, and all the input will be taken on board and will be assembled then in a reworked report that will be presented on October the 1st, and that will go to the IGF and can then also be adjusted. But again, this is not sort of hard and fast cast in stone, but we have to discuss on how best to improve. But I personally would very much go along with your suggestion that we treat it like the other BPF reports and adjust it after the actual annual meeting.
Thank you, Marcus.
Thanks for that, Marcus. In fact, I think I just want to emphasize here how valuable this type of report will be in the context of the IGF being midway through its renewed WSIS plus 10 mandate. And I can also report, it's very preliminary, but I'm in discussion with ISOC and some other institutions to do a paper that reflects on participation in the IGF, that uses the metrics that we have, but then analyzes it critically to look at how shifts in participation from stakeholder group and region has moved across the IGF since its inception. And I think these output papers will be useful in multiple ways, but also because we are mid-year through our mandate. And next, I want to give the floor to Vote. I don't see anyone else in the speakers queue, and we have roughly 8 minutes left to the end of this session. So Vote and Atrice, introduce yourself, you have the floor. Vote, we can't hear you. Are you unmuted?
No, can you hear me? Sorry, can you hear me like this?
Yes, now we can hear you.
Okay, thank you. There's something with the microphone on the laptop. Thank you very much. This is Wouter Natris, Internet Governance Consultant from the Netherlands. I would like to respond to Marcus' presentation and would like to give one extra comment perhaps for consideration. It was said about dissemination of the end results of the BPFs. And what I think could be added to it, that up front, it is also deliberated how the best practices can best be disseminated among the relevant stakeholders, because that's probably one way to get more involvement in upfront as well. And I think that is something which is often overlooked when the importance of the topic is identified, that who actually needs to become a member of this group to have a chance at success and a better dissemination and a better, broader input. So that's the comment I would like to make, and thank you for the opportunity.
Thanks very much, Vart. I think that's a really important point. We shouldn't assume that the same dissemination practices will work for all stakeholder groups. And I don't see anyone else asking for the floor, but there's been a discussion in chat. So Secretariat, can I ask you just to read for us a few highlights from the comments that have been made in the chat session?
Hi, Henriette. Yes, thank you. I will
Thanks,
read a couple of chats. Just a second. From Amir from Iran, I propose that the Digital Cooperation BPF, it could help to exchange best practices in area of digital cooperation related to the SG's digital roadmap. From Mark Carvel, thanks to Marcus for excellent overview of the draft. This work on IGF and especially BPF modalities is timed well with the UN roadmap on architecture, important to keep in step with this. From Giacomo Mazzone, I stress the importance of what Wout just told about how to organize our future works. And I believe that those would be the key, yes. I believe those would be the latest comments reflecting Marcus's points.
Thanks for that, Anya. I just want to clarify to Amir Hossein, there isn't a BPF on digital cooperation. There is a working group on IGF strategy and strengthening that is looking at digital cooperation. And then I think all the different BPFs are looking at digital cooperation to some extent in the context of their work. And Marcus, did you have any final thoughts, in particularly in response to some of the comments that were made?
Well, thank you very much, and thank you for the comments. And I think they were all very helpful, and I certainly very much agree with what Wout said. There's no one-size-fits-all model. I mean, each BPF has to find its own strategy for dissemination of its outcomes depending on the subject area. Obviously, the relevant stakeholder groups are different depending on the BPF. I mean, the BPF on gender and access obviously has a different stakeholder constituency than a BPF on cybersecurity. So we have to target your audience really carefully and specifically addressing your interest groups that are involved in the particular BPF. But thank you all for your comments. They were all very helpful, and they'll be taken into account. And I invite you all then to actively participate once we release the report and send your comments. And we will maybe also reach out to some of you individually when you make comments and have follow-up questions and so on. So, and last but not least, thank you for the encouraging words. And we also think this is a very relevant exercise to bring the IGF forward and really enhance its impact. Thank you.
Thanks very much, Marcus, and thanks to Wim and everyone else. Remember that BPFs, they're not new in the IGF, but I think we also at a junction now with the roadmap for digital cooperation and the support for the IGF Plus model, where we need to think how these BPFs can fit well into an enhanced IGF model. And for example, the idea of a policy incubator, how can the BPFs support or inform such a function? So for those of you involved in the BPFs and who comment and participate in it, also think about how those BPFs can be strengthened and fit into the future stronger IGF. We've come to the end of the first part of today's open consultation, and we have 1 minute left, but we've prepared a poll for you. So just stay with us for a minute or two. And this is really taking us back to yesterday's discussion about the virtual IGF, where we had some brainstorming to what is still a very new reality for us to deal with. But we wanted to get your feedback on some very sort of broad parameters of how, as the MAG and the Secretariat, we should approach planning for virtual IGF 2020. So before you go, we're going to put the poll online now. You can fill it in and we'll look at the result and then we'll break. Thanks. It should be in front of you now. Not very complicated. Just 3 questions for you to look at and respond to.
I am yet. In the meantime, I want to thank again the Secretariat for the work of showing the video. I think it was important. And I think that the way we tested successfully the way of making Zoom work with video finally worked.
It did, and I think that we're going to have to use these methods a lot more in the coming months. I see we are up to 52 people have responded to the poll. Everyone else, please try and respond. The more of you respond, the better for us. The more feedback we have or input we have. Okay, I think we have 65% of participants that have voted. So we've just closed it, and we can share the results. Secretariat, are you able to? Good, you can see the results. So thanks very much. In fact, this is very helpful. We see that there's a slight preference for spacing the IGF over a longer period, but clearly not a very long period. And then we also, interestingly enough, that seems to be a preference for having the time slots, the period over which the IGF will run, concentrated in one time zone. So thanks very much. And then there clearly is a preference for workshop proposers to be given the option of choosing their time slot. So we can't promise that we will follow any one of these particular approaches. The MAG and the Secretariat will have many considerations to take into account, but we'll definitely take this on board. So on that, I want to thank everyone, close the morning session, and remind you that we are starting again at 1300 UTC, and then we'll be looking at dynamic coalitions, and we'll go on to having an address from Under Secretary General Liu. And I'm very happy to report that we have ministerial representation for both the hosts from IGF 22 and 23. So we'll have Ethiopia and Japan having their vice ministers present to address us. So everyone, enjoy your break, if it's a meal break or a work break, and we'll see you back promptly at 1300 UTC. Thanks, everyone.